Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to APUSH. Today we're going to move into the 1990s, talking about the economic policies of the Bush administration and how that paved the way for a third-party challenge and the rise of a guy named Bill Clinton. So, here are our objectives for today. Let's take a moment and move forward. Probably the most important thing to happen during the Bush years was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Soviet leadership had become increasingly ineffective in the 1980s, and increasing economic and military pressure put on by the Reagan administration led to a real financial crisis. As you hopefully remember from your world history classes, a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union, pushing a policy of glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, meaning economic restructuring, both trying to open up their society, providing more freedom of speech, freedom of the press, criticism of government, and also trying to provide in more capitalist influences, was an attempt to reform and revitalize the Soviet Union. But in the end, what happened was Gorbachev was overthrown, and hardline communists took over, and then opposition to this coup led to the rise of a guy named Boris Yeltsin, who gave a famous speech on a tank, and the Soviet Union collapsing. The Berlin Wall came down in 89, the rest of Eastern Europe declared themselves free of communism, and the Soviet republics went their separate way in 91. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to a unipolar world in which the United States was now the sole remaining superpower and global hegemon. This allowed the United States to act more or less freely throughout the decade of the 1990s, with general global consensus on our side. After all, we just won the Cold War. The Soviet Union was no more, Russia was our ally, and what couldn't we do during this time period? In general, Russia is going to become, at this point, a regional power, and they're mostly a capitalist democracy that is definitely not a threat to world stability. Probably. Maybe. Yeah. The United States is able to sort of cast off Vietnam syndrome with the first Iraq war, known as Desert Storm. As you hopefully remember, the United States had backed Saddam Hussein against Iran in the Iran-Iraq War. But in the late 1980s, Saddam tried to expand his territory by invading the small oil-rich nation of Kuwait. This was a red line for the Bush administration, and we decided to teach Saddam a lesson and force him out of Kuwait. And so the U.S. launched Operation Desert Storm, obliterating the Iraqi army in a series of airstrikes and an invasion, and forcing them to evacuate Kuwait. The spectacular success of this operation restored American confidence in our military and gave us a real sense of unlimited possibilities. We decided to keep Saddam in power because having a secular dictator over the sort of geopolitical, ethnically, and religiously diverse country of Iraq was seen as better than any sort of transition to a new state. And so we leave Saddam in power, Kuwait is preserved, and the US is now on top of the world. The Desert Storm operation, again, as I said, increased our geopolitical cachet and gave us a real sense of unlimited possibilities. The Bush administration also pushed the Americans with Disabilities Act, providing greater rights for people with disabilities, requiring the government to provide accommodations for people, leading to the creation of individualized education plans in education, and also wheelchair ramps, braille on signs, things like that, in order to help people who are differently abled navigate their world. So that's a huge success for the Bush administration. But economically, Bush is going to face the bursting of a speculative bubble. The deregulation, especially in the banking and investment sectors during the Reagan administration, led to a huge Wall Street boom. That then collapsed in the late 1980s, leading to a recession. Bush, when running for the nomination, pledged that he would not raise taxes, famously saying, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Unfortunately, falling government revenues required Bush to raise taxes in order to prevent the government from running increasingly large deficits. This led to substantial pushback against Bush from a lot of his key supporters and from conservatives, basically, painting him as a hypocrite who's willing to break campaign promises when they're no longer convenient. Bush laying out his plan for the budget, argues that we need to have a balanced budget and that that's more important than his previous campaign promise. And I'll let you decide for yourself whether adherence to key ideals and promises is more important or a level of pragmatism in order to face current challenges is a more laudable trait for a politician to have. We also, during Bush, see an increasing of racial tensions. One of the problems that we'd faced in the aftermath of the civil rights movement is that some of the work for the civil rights movement was somewhat unfinished. As we remember, de facto segregation was still a thing. Black people being not allowed into the suburbs was a thing. Redlining or the not giving loans to black people to get houses in various neighborhoods was pretty rampant. And all of this led to what's called the racial wealth gap. The gap in wealth between black families and white families. This lack of economic opportunity created problems and led to economic issues within black neighborhoods, a level of economic stagnation and decay that weren't seen in other places. This was coupled with the white flight of deindustrialization and the creation of these economically disadvantaged neighborhoods that provided few opportunities for black people. This, combined with increasing tensions with police officers, led to the breaking down of our sense of racial solidarity, and the breaking of the illusion that for most Americans, we'd moved past the issue of race. Rodney King was a motorist who was pulled over for speeding in 1991. There was a confrontation with the LA police, and the LA police were caught on camera brutally beating Rodney King. A jury then acquitted the cops of the beating despite this evidence, and the result of this was substantial riots in Los Angeles. This rioting, the likes of which we hadn't seen since 1968, really shook a lot of Americans out of their level of complacency and started raising some pretty serious questions about how much progress we'd actually made on creating the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had, and it make questioning our general narrative on race. Here's the account of the LA riots. Take a moment, pause, and read, and we'll move on. So for the election of 92, we've got a lot of different factors going on here. The riots in LA and Bush's general unpopularity over raising taxes are an issue. The Republicans are still going to nominate Bush because, again, we almost never throw out a sitting president, despite the fact that his approval ratings are not great. The Democrats, who have struggled in the past couple election cycles, nominate a young Southerner, William Jefferson Clinton, who's going to go out and campaign vigorously and bring a new sort of youth and vitality to American politics. But one of the decisive moments and decisive factors in 92 is the rise of Ross Perot. Ross Perot is a Texas billionaire who made his money off of oil revenue. He's going to form his own political party, the Reform Party, which is going to nominate him for president. And he's going to have a bunch of really, really awesome spots on TV that if you've never watched one of Ross Perot's television ads, you absolutely need to. Do you like charts? Do you like a Texas accent? Then Ross Perot's TV ads are for you. He's going to gain significant support before inexplicably dropping out of the race, accusing the Bush campaign of trying to undermine him and embarrass his family. And then he's gonna jump back in the race for reasons that are also completely confusing. In general, Ross Perot is confusing, but he's incredibly enjoyable to watch. And if you've never seen Dana Carvey's sketches on SNL portraying Ross Perot, you definitely need to go look at those because they are truly wonderful. So here's Ross Perot jumping back into the race. Bill Clinton is also going to build a lot of support through his youth and vitality. Famously, he looked incredibly cool playing the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show. And so if you've never seen this clip, you definitely need to go watch Bill Clinton play the saxophone. And this is going to pave the way to a smashing electoral victory, despite the fact that he only won a plurality of the popular vote. As you can see here, Ross Perot is going to substantially outperform most third-party candidates, and there's a real question if he hadn't jumped out of the race, if he might have thrown the race to the House of Representatives and prevented, Clinton from winning a majority. So, as it is, he simply plays spoiler for Bush, but there's a real question as to what might have happened had Ross Perot not suspended his campaign and then jumped back in. It's an open question. Bill Clinton is going to then ascend to the presidency. Bill Clinton sees himself as kind of a young JFK. Here he is meeting with JFK. He's young, he's handsome. The downside of Bill Clinton is has been an air of scandal floating around him since he was governor of Arkansas. There was some questions about sexual impropriety when he was governor of Arkansas and potential affairs, and there was a question about his ties to an investment company called Whitewater, and whether or not this development company got contracts, and whether or not Clinton was involved in this whole Whitewater thing. And so, as Clinton ascends to the presidency, there's going to be continuous investigations around him, which we're going to spend much more time on in the next lecture. We also, under Clinton, get an attempt to push universal health care that was championed by the First Lady, Hillary Clinton. This has colloquially become known as Hillary Care, but control of Congress by Republicans prevents this from happening, and universal health care and expanded health care remains sort of the one of the goals of the progressive liberal movement that the United States has yet to achieve. We also, during this time period, see a rise in street gangs and gun violence during the 1990s. This leads to an increase in pushes for criminal justice reform and this real question about what is happening in these neighborhoods. Spoiler alert, what's generally happening is that a lack of economic opportunity leads people to form connections and try to make money in other ways. And one of those ways is selling drugs. For American society, we get this moral crisis over the rise of gangster rap music, which seems to glorify this lifestyle. And there's this real sense that certain elements of American society are heading in the wrong direction, especially after the murder of Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur in gang-related incidents. And so there's this real sense that we need to do something, harsher penalties, harsher laws, something, in order to curb the rise in street gangs. This leads to a conservative wave coming in 94 with the rise of a guy named Newt Gingrich and his contract with America. These conservatives are going to really stymie Clinton for the rest of his administration and require him to work across the aisle if he's going to try to get everything done. Fortunately, Clinton is a relatively moderate Democrat and pretty effective at working with Republicans, despite the fact that government shutdown is going to happen for the first time in the 1990s over failures to agree upon a budget. So here's Newt Gingrich's contract with America, the rise of sort of this modern conservative movement. And finally, the O.J. Simpson trial is going to sharply divide Americans. We mention this only because this exposes a racial divide within American society. When O.J. is found not guilty, this outrages a lot of white Americans, and Black Americans saw this as yet another example of prosecutors overly targeting people of color. So the O.J. Simpson trial, you can do endless deep dives into this. I know there's a variety of different television shows about it, so dive into it if you're interested. But the O.J. Simpson acquittal is going to sharply divide American public opinion. And the Clinton administration is not going to do a great job on LGBTQ rights either. They are going to push Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which allows gay people to serve in the military, but not openly. And they're also going to pass something called the Defense of Marriage Act, which defines marriage as between one man and one woman. And so Clinton's record relatively mixed on all of these things. So that brings us to a close on the beginning of the Clinton years. For next time, we'll dive into Clinton a little bit more, talk about the economic trends and new technology emerging in the 1990s, and stream towards the year 2000. So thank you for listening.